Hey everyone, hope you're having a good day. I wanted to hop on and do a very brief video for you guys today about a subject that God was talking to me about, still kind of in line with a lot of this stuff that God's been referencing with transition recently. And I wanted to hop on and tell you this: what is easy for us in our lives isn't always what is best for us. What is easy for us in our lives isn't always what is best for us. You know, God was reminding me out of Exodus 12 today about the Israelites and their journey out of Egypt. You know what probably would have been quote unquote easier for the Israelites? It actually might have been a little bit easier for them to just stay in the place of Egypt. You know, they were familiar with it. It was comfortable. You know, it was a territory that they weren't going to have to take. There was going to be zero conquest involved in this thing. It was something that was just so familiar to them, you know, that even though it was destructive, even though it was keeping them in a place of bondage, even though they were not being treated correctly, at least it was familiar. At least it was quote unquote easier to stay there than it was to get set free from the place of bondage. And I wanted to tell you guys today that a lot of times we try to stay in what is comfortable in our personal lives at the expense of walking into what God has for us. And, you know, God was telling me that this is a time of significant transition for a lot of people, and we have to make a decision. You know, God never promised you that your exodus, quote unquote, would be easy. He never promised that. But what he did promise you is that eventually it was going to be worth it. You were going to be in a healthier place. You were going to be around better people. You were going to be in circumstances that were good for you. That promised land was going to get reached. But that transition season is not always easy. And so convenience for ourselves often feels better at the time. It feels better to us and to our flesh in a lot of ways. But it's more hurtful for us a lot of times in the long run. Amen. You know, it might have felt in some ways more convenient, quote unquote, for the Israelites to stay in Egypt. You know, they wouldn't have to move their entire houses. They had food. It may not have been the best food, but they had that part taken care of. You know, they knew who their next door neighbors were. You know, they weren't going to have to engage in any kind of fighting or standing against any kind of enemies. You know, they weren't going to have to run away from the Egyptian army. You know, they weren't going to have to apply any faith really to stay in that situation. Whereas their way out was going to require some faith. It was going to require doing some things that they had never done before. It was going to require being willing to pick up their feet and to move out of the familiar territory that they were used to. Amen. And so we've got to learn in our lives as Christians when God says go, when God says, I am ready to break you out of this season of bondage. I am asking you to move. I am asking you to shift. What we've got to learn to do in our lives as Christians is we've got to learn to embrace the things that are healthy for us and to not tolerate the things that are not. Amen. And sometimes that means giving up our comfort. Sometimes that means giving up the place of convenience in our lives for a season so that we can step into the place and into the things that God has for us in our personal lives. I wanted to hop on and tell you guys this: freedom in our lives almost always has a cost, but it's almost always worth it as well. Amen. You know, Egypt represented a place of slavery. It represented a place of continuing to go around the mountain over and over and over again. It represented years of bondage. It represented being treated incorrectly in their personal lives. And sometimes freedom has to be fought for. It's not something that, you know, people want you to walk in, but it's very much something that God is a fan of. How do I know that? Because it says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. God doesn't want you in chains. He doesn't want you staying in that place of bondage the rest of your life, but you've got to make a decision. Are you going to stay in what's easy, or are you going to be willing to go through this transition season in your life to step into what is best for you, to step into and to realign yourself with the place of health in your personal life? You've got to ask yourself that question. And so if you've been in a comfortable place, but a dysfunctional place in your personal life, I want you to ask yourself, am I ready to step into the place of freedom? Am I ready to step into health? Am I ready to step into what's best for me in my personal life? Because if you're willing to align yourself with God in that, there's a promised land for you on the other side, but it's not always easy. making that decision. And it sometimes requires a little bit of hard work, quote unquote, up front to make the transition happy so that you can be in a better place in your personal life for years down the line. Amen. I hope you guys have a great day. I will chat with you again soon.